The winter wind howled across the empty steppe of Kharkov, carrying with it the metallic scent of industry and smoke. Inside the massive halls of the Kharkov locomotive factory, sparks danced like fireflies. The war had not yet reached the Soviet Union, but everyone in that building knew it was coming. Mikhail Koshkin stood at the end of a long assembly line, his hands black with grease, a cigarette hanging from his lips. He was not a soldier, but he carried himself like one. Stern eyes, a jaw hardened by sleepless nights. Around him, the sounds of hammers and welding torches echoed against steel walls. The air trembled with the sound of invention. For years, the Soviet military had depended on light tanks, fast but fragile, designed more for parade than for war. Reports from Spain, where German panzer divisions had been tested in real combat, told a grim story. The Red Army's armor would be slaughtered in a real fight. Koshkin had read those reports. He had studied the burned-out shells of Soviet tanks returned from Spain, their armor pierced like paper. He knew what had to be done, but convincing Moscow was another battle entirely. At his drafting table, covered with blueprints and oil stains, Koshkin sketched something radical. It was not beautiful, it was practical, a machine born from necessity. Wide treads for mud and snow, sloped armor to deflect bullets, a powerful diesel engine to survive long marches, and a gun that could pierce any German tank on the field. He called it the A-20 prototype, but in his mind it was something more, the beginning of a revolution in armored warfare. The first tests were brutal. The Soviet High Command, cautious and skeptical, demanded that the design be simplified. It's too heavy, too complex, too expensive. But Koshkin refused. A soldier's life, he told them, is worth more than a few kilograms of steel. In early 1939, he stood before a panel of generals in Moscow. They wore the same expression, boredom mixed with suspicion. They didn't like engineers who thought too much. He knew that if his design failed, it could cost him his life. One of the generals leaned forward. "You say this machine can fight in any weather, on any ground?" Koshkin nodded. "It will fight where no other can. It will not fear snow, nor mud, nor fire." They laughed quietly. "And how will you prove it?" That question changed everything. Weeks later, in the dead of winter, the engineer climbed into the hatch of his prototype, a crude, armored shape that rumbled like a wounded animal. He called it the A-22, the direct ancestor of what would soon become the legendary T-34. Koshkin decided to prove his tank's worth the only way possible, by driving it from Kharkov to Moscow, more than 700 kilometers, in the middle of February. The idea was madness. The roads were frozen, the machine untested, and the temperature below minus 30 degrees Celsius. But he had no choice. When dawn broke, the convoy set off. 2 prototype tanks and a small truck carrying spare parts and fuel. The snow was so thick that the engines strained under the weight. Villagers came out of their homes to watch the strange machines crawl across the white plains. Children waved. Old men crossed themselves. Inside the cramped steel hull, Koshkin sat at the commander's seat, shivering despite the heat of the engine. His crew joked to stay warm, but their eyes betrayed fear. If the tank broke down in the wilderness, they would die there, frozen beside their dream. The days passed in a blur of cold and exhaustion. They crossed rivers, climbed muddy hills, and slept inside the tank when the wind became unbearable. The machine held together. The suspension groaned, the tracks screamed, but it never stopped. When they finally rolled into Moscow, the soldiers on guard stared in disbelief.
The tank was covered in mud and ice, its paint scorched, but it had survived. The convoy had done the impossible. Koshkin climbed out, his face red from wind and fever. He could barely stand, but he saluted the officers who approached. "Comrades," he said, his voice hoarse, "the machine works." The generals examined it, speechless. They saw the proof of endurance, not just of steel, but of will. That night, Koshkin collapsed with pneumonia. He had risked everything to bring the tank to Moscow. He would never fully recover. But before he died, he saw his creation approved for mass production. The name was changed to T-34, T for tank, and 34 for the year its design began. It was no longer just an idea on paper. It was real. And soon it would meet the German war machine head-on. No one in that frozen workshop could yet imagine that this improvised machine, born from the frame of a tractor, shaped by the mind of one stubborn engineer, would become the most feared tank of World War II. But the wheels of history had already begun to turn.
The sun rose over the plains of Ukraine like a dull red coin, filtered through the haze of burning fields. It was June 1941. Operation Barbarossa had begun. The German Wehrmacht, millions of men, thousands of tanks, planes, and guns, poured across the Soviet frontier with mechanical precision. No one had ever seen an invasion like it. Villages vanished in hours. The Red Army collapsed under the speed of the German blitzkrieg. Everywhere, Soviet soldiers fought and died with outdated weapons, standing in the path of a storm. And yet, in the chaos of retreat, a whisper spread among the men. A new tank has appeared. At first, no one believed it. The Germans had their panzers, sleek, disciplined, unstoppable. How could the Soviets, still reeling from the first weeks of disaster, have built anything to rival that? But deep in the forests near Minsk, reality was about to change. A German Panzer III rolled down a dirt road, its crew confident, laughing through the open hatches. The invasion had been easy so far. Soviet tanks burned like matchsticks, their armor thin and their guns weak. Then, out of the trees, a new shape emerged. It was squat, angular, and painted in a rough green. Its armor was sloped like a blade, its gun long and thick. It looked wrong. Too low, too smooth, too modern. The German commander raised his binoculars. "Was ist das?" he murmured. Before he could answer, the Soviet tank fired. The shell slammed through the Panzer's front plate, tearing it apart in one explosion. The T-34, for that was its name, rolled forward through the smoke, its engine roaring like thunder. Its armor shrugged off machine gun fire. Bullets ricocheted harmlessly, ringing like rain on iron. German radio operators panicked. "Unidentified Russian tank cannot penetrate. Repeat, cannot penetrate." In the command tents behind the lines, confusion turned to alarm. Reports came in from every front. "Our shells bounce off. Our anti-tank guns fail. This new tank moves like no other." The T-34 had arrived. Its origins traced back to the man who refused to build weakness, Mikhail Koshkin. Though dead, his vision lived in steel. Every plate of sloped armor, every wide tread, every piston of its diesel heart was proof of his defiance. On the battlefield, soldiers saw it not as a machine, but as a savior. Crews named their tanks Avenger, Motherland, Victory. They painted red stars and slogans on the turrets. "Za Koshkin" for Koshkin, some scrawled in chalk. But the T-34's triumph was not instant. Many broke down in the mud. Spare parts were scarce, fuel was rationed, and inexperienced crews learned in battle, not in training. Still, the tank's design forgave their mistakes.
It was simple, durable, and built for survival, just like the people who made it. In one battle outside Smolensk, a German officer captured a damaged T-34. He climbed onto it, tapping the armor with disbelief. He said, "This isn't a tank, it's a fortress." The German engineers sent it back to Berlin for study. When Hitler himself saw the reports, he grew furious. He demanded, "Why was I not told about this sooner? Find out how they built it and build me one better." But even as the Germans tried to understand the T-34, the Soviets built more. Dozens became hundreds, hundreds became thousands. Women, children, and old men worked day and night in frozen factories, welding armor plates in the glow of sparks, their faces blackened by soot. They built them in barns, in subway tunnels, even under bombardment. The Kharkov factory that birthed the first prototype was gone now, destroyed by German bombs, but production had moved east, to the Ural Mountains, beyond the enemy's reach. There, among the snow and iron, the T-34 multiplied like an iron swarm. It was no longer just Koshkin's invention, it was the will of an entire nation forged into steel. As the months passed, German tank crews grew wary. Whenever they saw that low, slanted silhouette moving through the smoke, their confidence faltered. They called it Die russische Bestie, the Russian beast. By the winter of 1941, as the German advance froze outside Moscow, the T-34 led the Soviet counterattack. In the snow, its wide treads glided where the panzers sank. It fought in minus 30 degrees cold, engines growling, armor glazed with frost. Soviet soldiers watched as their tanks crushed the ice and charged. For the first time since the invasion began, they believed the Germans could be stopped. That winter, the T-34 wasn't just a tank, it was a symbol of survival, of resistance, of vengeance. And though Mikhail Koshkin never lived to see it, his creation had done exactly what he promised. It could fight anywhere. It feared nothing. It changed everything.